Welcome to the Giving Back is Dead podcast brought to you by Scott Stover. Giving Back is Dead is a progressive, open forum for discussing next-gen giving to the arts and sustainable practices for nonprofits. For more information on Scott, myself, and our advisory services, please visit scottstoverinc.com. Welcome to Giving Back is Dead. This morning we're speaking with Chelsea Spengemann, who is founder and executive director of a nonprofit called Soft Network. Good morning, Chelsea.
Good morning, Scott.
Thank you for taking the time to come in and talk to us. One, I'm terribly interested in your nonprofit, Soft Network. I think you're doing just incredible and moving work. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what is Soft Network?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. I'm also very interested in what you're doing. So it's great to have a public conversation. Soft Network is a community for reimagining artist legacies. And we are a pretty new nonprofit based in Manhattan. And we are a peer-to-peer group of estate workers, curators, artists, and we're really trying to create and rather than create, we're trying to meet this urgent need to preserve and make accessible at-risk narratives. When I say we, my other founders, Sarah Vanderbeek, Marie Warsh, and Max Warsh, have both worked with artist estates for the past 15 years. And maybe we'll get into the specifics of that later. But basically, we're just taking our experience, bringing it all together, and trying to help others in our situation.
You've already said quite a bit on which I really would like to break that down. But before we break it down, I wanted to do something a little bit unusual, which is to quote one of the artist estates with which you've been working. And because I thought when I read that they wrote something about the work that they're doing with you, I found it rather moving. And this is the Paul Gardere Studio. So the Paul Gardere Studio says that Soft Network is advocates and relief agents for the long labor of love that is posthumous artist caretaking. It is the most loving work I have ever witnessed in the art world. And as a budding nonprofit, they don't even benefit personally. So many artists will die without gallery representation, and for those left holding the remnants of their practice, the road ahead is lonely, tiresome, and beset by access problems of the art ecosystem. That I had done years of Paul's archival work on my own, by the time I found them, only made me more grateful for their support. Very moving.
I love that quote from Kat. It is very moving, and she really articulates it so well, exactly what we're aiming to do.
I don't hear, let's say, they're kind of a client. I guess to me, it would be kind of a client say things like this, and I found it incredibly moving. You know, it's very rare that in a nonprofit, the people with whom you're interacting say that they're really, that this was something essential to their existence, in fact.
Yes, and Kat's not the only person that's said that we've kind of used this very emotional language. We've saved their lives. Like it is very emotional work, legacy work. And Kat is the daughter of artist Paul Gardere, who died in 2011, and we worked with Kat in 2022 and over about a year, a little bit longer. And she was our first estate in residence. A core part of our program is a fully funded 1 year to 2 year support for estates and archives in need of any kind of assistance. And so one of our founders, Max, knew Kat, knew that she had been working on her father's estate by herself for many years. And so we reached out to her to see if she needed help. And she was, very interested in what we were doing. She was already a member of I can't remember if she was already a member of AFL or not, but we can get into that later. But yeah, she wanted some help. This work, you can do it alone up to a certain point, and then uh, this legacy work really benefits from having a network of people that are doing outreach to institutions, to galleries, are helping with the organizational side, the strategizing side. And so it was a great first residency. Paul Gardere is an incredible artist whose work was just not accessible, not in the history books. And I feel like we were really able to shift that with very little, investment. We got a huge, return, or it had a great impact. So we did this solo booth at Independent 20th Century with Paul's work.
I feel I'm going to miss, if you don't mind, I'm going to interrupt you because I
Yeah.
think you're saying a lot, and I think I'm going to miss. I want to
Okay.
understand
I'll slow down. Yeah.
I want to understand everything that you said. So
Yeah.
first of all, you know, when how do you choose the artist with whom you're working? How do you what I'm curious about is in the materials that I've been reading about what you're doing, it seems like you're making an effort to not establish a hierarchy of who is relevant and who is not relevant. But obviously, by choosing who with whom you work, you are making a choice. So how do you decide something like that Paul Gardere is important and we want to make the effort with Paul Gardere's state? So how do you make those decisions? And then in addition to that, you say you've made a difference with little investment. What does that mean, made a difference?
Great. Yeah, those are great questions. So, um, the estates that we're looking to give this fully funded 2 years of support to are
Or maybe, excuse
really
me, I'm going to interrupt you again. Maybe
okay.
you should talk first about the program, your archive and residence program.
Sure.
As
The
one of
archive.
that's one of the things that you do is this archive in residence program. So why don't you go ahead and talk about that first, and then I understand that the Paul Gardere estate fit within that program.
That's right. Um, so our core program is called the Archive in Residence, and that is a fully funded program of support for a select estate or archive that's in need of assistance. And what we do is we find that collection, and then we ask them what they need, and then through our network, we help them realize that goal. And then we kind of send them on their way with a lot more support than they had initially. So, what that looks like is a lot of times bringing a lot of material into our studio, working on it here. We usually include at least 2 exhibitions in our exhibition space. We try to do one group exhibition that includes contemporary artists, and then we try to do one solo exhibition. We also come up with public programs. Um, the topics somehow relate to the collection that we're working with. But often the people speaking at those programs, again, are contemporary artists, other legacy workers. That's how we bring our community together. And then we also are fundraising to make a publication at the end of the residency, a small publication that will kind of become a series that they can walk away with, because we find those are incredibly useful. And so that's the estate in residence or archive in residence program. Estate and archive are 2 words that get used a lot in different ways. When I say archive in residence, it's not just an artist archive, it's also their collection, their artwork, and their archives. It's a holistic approach, but we're calling it a collection and archive in residence is what it is. So
I think it's just an incredible concept. So tell me, how do you choose the artist? How many artists can be in residence at one time?
Um, that's a great question. Right now, we're really limited to working on one artist. Um, and we've recently expanded it to a 2-year period because this work does take a long time. Um, and the way the artists are selected in the past has really just been through our existing peer-to-peer network, and knowing who is out there doing this work and needs help. We are looking to help artists um, that are, um, that are at risk, whose narratives have not been acknowledged in history. We're also looking at artists that are excluded from institutions for various reasons, lack trust in institutions, or just lack the resources to organize, maintain, and make accessible their work. So it's pretty broad right now. Um, because of that criteria alone, the artists that we end up working with are usually working in more non-traditional media. Like Paul Gardere made paintings, but they're really mixed media paintings. And Susan Brockman, which was the estate we just finished, was an experimental filmmaker and photographer. Our expertise is in more ephemeral multimedia artworks, and we find that those are the estates that really are the most at risk and lack the most resources because of not having a market or any source of income from the artwork. So we are trying to develop like an application program for the future, but right now it's just been through our network of peers.
And then the board, I think you're 4 board members. The 4 board members get together and decide, yes, we'll proceed and we'll have this particular estate or archive in residence. Is that how it works now?
Yes, we have 6 board members, and absolutely, yes, they're very involved. It's a working board, so yeah, they're very involved um, and all those decisions.
What interests me, and I think we touched on this the other day when we were talking, is the market, the art market, and commercial galleries, and what is the the impact of this commercial gallery world on, let's say, so can I call the estates and archives with which you're working as, can I say, experimental art? Can I use that term, or what term can I use?
You can say under resourced.
Under resourced makes me uncomfortable because that could be anything.
Okay.
That could be a lot. I presume most art produced is under resourced.
Right. I mean, yeah, I feel that way about experimental too. I mean, it's like you can say the more independent or smaller, or they tend to be kind of, one person is managing them. They're not artist and dad foundations, right? um that's probably a big distinction. um they're kind of like,
So my question is really about the market, because in
yeah.
general, if the problem with which you're dealing is that the market seems to determine what is relevant and what is worth saving. And that is what I find terribly disturbing. And I feel that's what the interest is in what you're trying to do, is you're saying, no, the market is not the arbiter of what is relevant. And this is what I particularly like in what you're doing. But I think that creates a whole series of issues and handicaps, because then what is the impact as you move forward? Part of what you want to do, if I understand correctly, is you want to be able to have these artists have museum representation. You want them this third party validation by a larger community, which inevitably passes by the institution. And as we see today, now I'm going to say many different things that I'm sure you will want to discuss and dissect. As we see today, museums are run by boards, and the board members are mostly members who are active collectors and who focus on art which have greater commercial value. So I think the whole system is stacked against what you want to do.
Yeah, that's one way to look at it. I look at it as we're attempting to kind of infiltrate that system and get people to think about value of art outside of its market value. Not every estate we work with will ever have a place in the market or will ever be valued um, that way. Not every estate, the outcome will be different for every estate what they need. So Paul Gardere deserves a market. He belongs in a gallery. He belongs in museums. 1000%. This work is marketable. Collectors should be paying attention. It's completely overlooked, and it will be. He has a upcoming at a group show at Canada Gallery. It has a lot happening for this estate. So the estate of Susan Brockman, which is the one that we did after Paul Gardere, experimental film, photography, a lot of it missing. The goal for that estate is not necessarily to find a gallery or to build a market for this artist. There are different goals, and so part of our organization, why we call ourselves a community for reimagining artist legacies, is this idea of reimagining ways to see these legacies live on that are outside of the institution, outside of that market model, outside of that pipeline. It's not always about following that pipeline. So if it's not, what are the other options? And so a lot of times in our programs and our gatherings, we're talking to artists about thinking about how to value things differently um, and yeah, and what it means to try and preserve everything, and yeah, what should be saved and what doesn't get saved and why. We really need space right now to discuss all of that and think about all of that.
So why don't we take the example of the Brockman estate? How does it? What did you determine are the objectives, and how can it continue to live and be sustainable outside of the commercial considerations, commercial market? I mean,
Yeah. So with Brockman, an important goal there was preserving her films and getting those in distribution. So that provides like a small source of income, but not a lot. And again, this is based on what the family, in conversation with the family and with us, what we decided would be best. I'm sure there's other approaches, but it's about identifying, taking it down from 10 boxes of film and video material down to one box of you know doing the research and figuring out these are her titles, these are what need to be preserved, here's the final copies in a format that can now be made accessible, and then you can get rid of everything else. So that was one thing that we accomplished, and we did that through a film preservation grant. And Another thing, the Brockman estate has like immense research value because she was a very kind of like well-connected, artist on the east end of Long Island, and also down in Tribeca at a time when women were living down there in lofts in the 70s and 80s, and she was part of that community. So her papers, her diaries, her all of this has really immense research value. So we're working on placing those in a public collection where they can be accessible. Her work has been really also, I think, revelatory for women filmmakers. She was part of a collective called Women Artist Filmmakers, and there's a lot of research interest around that work. So the family has been really pleased to just learn about what Susan, what she was up to, what the work is, what can be saved, what can be discarded. and just having things organized. And that might be it. You constantly have to evaluate, how much are you investing in this collection and for what kind of return. And we try to be very honest and open about what we can achieve. I would never tell a collection or an estate that, oh yeah, in 10 years, Susan Brockman will be a huge name and she'll be in every museum and we'll have sold out shows. That's just not how we're operating. When I met this family, this material was, I think you saw a picture, in a basement with the boxes in horrible condition. So again, we're just kind of giving them legs. We're introducing them to people, and making the work accessible and distributing it and making it available to researchers. And that might be it. And that's huge for them.
So it's not, is it sometimes do you work with them on setting up, helping them with their endowment so that it can be sustainable?
Um, uh, yeah, I mean, we're again, like the estates we're working with often are not going to have an endowment or raise an endowment, unless there are things in her private collection that are potentially worth some money that, yes, we are looking at helping her distribute and sell. And we're always trying to help them find ways to raise money to pay for whatever's coming up. We did sell one photograph out of her exhibition, so that went into helping to pay for some of the framing cost. But again, and it's like film distribution and licensing, that's not a ton of income, but it's something that we can set up so they have a little bit. And then also, if there's opportunities for sales, we can provide that support from them because we have gallery experience and art fair experience and things like this. But again, it's not, it does take investment on behalf of the family. The idea that like every estate or collection can have an endowment and that endowment can be managed, like already you're talking at like a totally different level that I would say 90% of the estates are never going to reach.
But is one of the major parameters for which they ask help is to have some kind of long-term financial sustainability? Isn't that one of the things they're asking you to help with, or not? To come up with a plan of long-term.
Sure. Yeah, sure. But it depends, every estate is very unique. And for the Vanderbeek estate, for example, which I've worked with now for almost 20 years, we are just getting to the position where we can finally kind of realize this goal that they had very early on to have some kind of savings, some kind of account that some money could be held to be passed on to future generations or could be invested. And this is a very, wildly successful artist, very prolific artist, has a gallery, has shows at MoMA, is in all the collections. And yet, I mean, we're talking about artists who just don't even if their work was selling, it's not at a price point where there's going to be a long-term, sustainable amount of income, coming in. Like it's very, I would not really promise that anybody, and that's not the kind of estates that we're working with. Again, like if you have a painting estate or something more marketable, then yes, that would be very easy to set up a long-term plan for how to see that, um, accrue value and et cetera. But
You mentioned that you were working with the Vanderbeek estate for 20 years. So if I understand correctly, the whole concept of the soft network was really the outgrowth of your 20 years of working with that Vanderbeek estate. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that work and how it led you to see the need to create soft network.
sure. So, yeah, I would say, almost 20 years on and off, in between, going back to graduate school, having two children. I was always kind of the person that the family would go to whenever a show was about to happen or just to respond to emails to keep up with things. And so, together with Sarah and Johannes van der Beek, who are both artists and are two of Stan's children. We kind of were like figuring out how to do this work on our own. And, it took many years to build trust, and to also gain the confidence that what we were doing was the right approach. I spent many like nights waking up in the middle of the night asking, like, am I just making this all up? Like, what am I doing? There's no guidebooks for how to manage an estate. And when I started, there was really, I had no sense of a community of, or of other people doing work like I was doing. The Artist Endowed Foundations that I knew about were very intimidating and felt like a different world, right? So nobody understood what I did for work when I tried to explain to them. It was a very different picture. So I felt very siloed off, very alone in the work that I was doing. Um, I was working with some of the biggest institutions in the country and internationally. And still nobody kind of understood what I was doing. The institutions were really dependent on the work.
Because of the size of the estates and archive, that was because they're not just big famous artists. Is that what it was about?
It's not about that. It's just very invisible labor. It's a very hidden part of the art world, estate work and legacy work. It encompasses so many different things. You are kind of like, I always compare it to being a contractor, but you're doing administrative stuff, you're doing research, you're doing emotional labor, speaking and navigating the family dynamics. You're doing all the accounting and bookkeeping and budgeting. You're curating the exhibitions, you're writing the press releases because you become the expert on the work and this whole span of work that when you go to do a show that people don't have at a gallery, at least. You are the, the image person, you're the conceptual person. Like, it just encompasses so many things, and it is very invisible work because and that's changing. That's the change we're going through right now, and that's why we built Soft Network, was to bring visibility to the work so that it could be valued, that people could get fairly compensated for the work, people could understand what it was we're doing. Because when somebody comes to you and asks for help for their estate, oh, you've done all this with the Vanderbeek estate, that's great. I have this collection, or I know somebody that has this collection. Can you help them do this? And then you tell them how much time and money that's going to take and what it's going to result in. And they're shocked, right? Because there's just, it's all behind the scenes. It's all invisible. So this was a huge part of why we created Soft Network. Um, and another reason we created Soft Network is because Sarah van der Beek is an artist herself. Um, and we had the benefit of working together in her studio for several years, and getting to see how an artist, engaged with a collection uh, was really special, and the relevance of that collection to her own work and her thinking about legacy and her work was really special. And we wanted to share that with our peers. I wanted to find my community of estate workers, and she wanted to find her community of artists that were interested in this work, and make them, bridge these two worlds, because they were really mutually beneficial and needed to be connected. Um, and so that's why we started Soft Network.
But fundamentally, I still don't understand the work that you're doing with underrepresented um, archives and estates is fundamentally the same that's done with the Robert Rauschenberg Foundation. I mean, it's the same work,
Exactly.
isn't it?
It is. And once I did, the Aspen Institute seminar, um, where again, like that's a program for Artist Endowed Foundation leaders. and somebody recommended, that I do it, and in talking with Christine, she was interested in me joining because I was representing a collection of a multimedia artist, and they didn't have a lot of that in the program. It's mostly painters, and so she was interested in bringing me into the conversation. Um, and once I kind of got to meet and see the structure of these artist endowed foundations for these huge artists that I was always very intimidated by, I realized, oh, I'm actually an expert here. They're asking the same questions I'm asking. We're struggling with the same things, except, their resources are just astronomically larger to problem solve and to get things done. And so the approach to those questions were very different, right? And so that's where I said, okay, they have these, we all have the same problems, right? But we're going to need to come together. These smaller estates need to come together to help each other, become a team for each other, right? Um, and create some kind of economy for each other that works better than this system that depends on the market. The Artist Endowed Foundation is based on the market value of the artist. So
And you keep talking about the peer-to-peer network. So if I understand correctly, this is what drove the concept of creating what you call the Artist Foundation and Estate Leaders List, EFL. Would you talk, which seems to me to be a brilliant idea as well. I think
thank
you've
you.
just done incredible work. So would you talk a little bit about what that is and how it works?
Yes, so AFL we started before Soft Network in 2019, and I started that with Tracy Bartley, who was also did the Aspen Institute seminar, and she ran the RB Katai Foundation, and I was running Vanderbeek. And we just, again, recognize this super urgent need for building a really accessible, no barrier to entry network of artist legacy workers that could share resources. It's a very simple idea. And so we just created a Google group. And people that we knew, we asked them to sign up, and we started asking each other questions and sharing articles, and sharing knowledge. Now the group has, about 300 members, mostly across the US. It's representatives from, small collections, but also from large artist endowed foundations. And also now a lot of contemporary artists that are thinking about their own legacy plans, which is really exciting. And it's a growing group. It's now a program of Soft Network. We're launching a kind of membership program in the fall and a new website in the fall, because of this demand. So
And how does that intersect with the Aspen Institute's Artist Endowed Foundation group and work? For me, the little bit, I've done a little bit of work with Artist Endowed Foundation, and I've always been told that that Christine Vinette's group is a little bit the gold standard for people working in this sector. Is it? And why do they not have something like you created, which is this peer-to-peer network where people can ask questions?
well, they do. A lot of people that do Aspen are part of AFL, and Christine's part of AFL. And yeah, it's a little bit apples and oranges. It's a much quicker, again, no barrier to entry. It's different than Aspen, and I highly recommend the Aspen seminar, and for Artist Endowed Foundation leaders specifically. And yeah, our group is, again, for people that maybe don't have the resources to do that seminar. It does cost a lot of money. It takes time. Takes place over a series of days. So yeah, does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
Now we've talked also, I think, previously as well. One of the things that you say often is the nonprofit system is flawed, and you think there should be more of a sense of a cooperative business model. Could you elaborate a little more on that?
Sure. It was always my intention to start an artist estate cooperative. But you need to have your members of your cooperative before you can start it. And so, um, what appeals to me about the cooperative economy is that it exists kind of independently and that its members both contribute to and benefit from the system. It's not a top down system like the nonprofit system where the nonprofits are reliant on very extremely wealthy individuals or organizations to fund their programs. In the cooperative, again, it's more of this peer to peer idea. You're contributing, you're benefiting. It's a generous economy, a very, the skill sets are kind of particular. So I think, based on my experience with estate work, it's very hard to make it a profitable um, business, which is why, I was looking for an alternative. I still think it would be a great model, the cooperative structure for estates, just because, again, the value takes so long to build, and is often not really matched compared to the expenses that are required for the labor and materials and everything to, over the long term.
I would think that some of the major foundations, like the Ford Foundation, would like this idea and would like to help to set up this kind of, they're interested in, or even the Getty would be interested in helping to create an innovative cooperative model for artist estates. Have you talked to them?
I have not talked to them. Again, I've been trying to make the group of people first, and that's what we've built over the past, like, in a very quick time, I think. Past couple of years, we have this like incredible support group. And so then with that group, if you can say, okay, we're thinking about turning this into cooperative, who's in, and then you go into that structure of voting members. And it's a lot of work, and it's not one individual, it's not individually led, so by definition. But um yeah, in terms of the art world, which we're hoping to kind of speak to a wider community than the art world and have a bigger audience than just the art world. But for now, I feel like what we're doing, that is really our audience, and the nonprofit structure is the most legible for that audience.
You've also told me in the past that you think the art world lacks cultural preservation. Could you speak to that? Why? Because you would think that what we, all of us in the art world, we want to preserve. But I think you're right.
Um, yeah, I don't know when I said that, or what the context of the conversation was, but I just think the rate of production in the art world is much greater than the rate of preservation. And I think that's really dangerous environmentally. And I think it's really dangerous culturally because there's so much backtracking that needs to happen historically, as we've seen in the past 10 years. There's so much work to do there, um, that I wish more resources were spent on helping these artist estates just make some of this work accessible, to write a more complete history of the culture. It seems very simple to me, rather than just constantly producing new work, producing new huge, outdoor sculptures, public sculptures that sit there and then get sent back to the artist, and the artist expected to store them. It's just, it's, we need to think more long term and more sustainably, I think.
And can you talk a little bit about Soft Network's financial model? What is your financial model? And if you had more funds, would you be able to do more?
That's a great question. Yes. So our model right now is, since we've just are just now getting our 501(c)(3, this fall we're really starting to fundraise more publicly, um, and we'll be applying for grants, kind of that traditional nonprofit arts model. We also offer services, consultation services on a sliding scale, so that we always have a good source of earned income. We also share our studio space. It's kind of like a co-working space as a source of income. Um, co-storage also. So that's our model right now. Of course, we're looking for, very interested and excited people to join our kind of uh, founding, sustainable, I forget what we're calling them. What are we calling them? The founding partners, whatever. We're
Founding
looking,
partners. Yeah.
we are ambassadors. Wait, what are we? Founding partners. Yes, we are actively seeking founding partners to support this project going forward. They will be crucial to our success. Um, we are very confident. We have received one grant that will be announced in the fall, and we're already speaking to um, larger foundations that are interested in funding us moving forward. So the only reason I'm still doing this is because people keep um, assuring me that this will get funded. So I'm feeling confident about that. And what was your other question? Okay, if we had more money, could we do more things? Um, yes, because I know, 5 people that I could hire today that, I know of a bigger space that we could occupy that people would want to join. I know more estates that need help. I know more estates that would pay for help. Um, yes, absolutely.
Well, I think you're doing incredible work, Chelsea. And I look forward to following you in the next few years. And I'm sure that you're going to be successful. I think it's something
Thank
that
you.
has to be done. And I think this is very important work, which any thoughtful person who's a part of our art ecosystem, I think would join me in saying that and encouraging you. So
Thank you. I hope so. Some people get it and some people just don't get it. Sometimes, it's care work, which is like not super appealing to people. But I see it as really essential. And again, the idea that we can get so much done with so little, compared to like the prices for producing new artworks or for buying, new very expensive market works. I think that should be very appealing to philanthropists and just individuals that are interested in art and being able to kind of encounter these unseen collections that are historically important. Um, so I hope people are excited, and will contribute and understand the finances that are required, because it is very labor intensive work. And just storing things, it's physical material, it takes up space. Preservation is very expensive. And again, it's kind of the invisible thing. When you see work on a museum wall by a dead artist, there's always a living person behind that has made that possible. And that takes money to realize. So I yeah, just the one other thing I want to really acknowledge is the living artist's role in this work. Um, Artists are some of the greatest preservationists that we have in the art world. By default, they are kind of carrying legacies on in their own work. But also, what we've come to find out is that many artists are actually taking care of physical collections themselves, and are caring for artist legacies of their peers that did not have families to take care of their work when they died, and things like this. So artists are a big part of our community, living artists, not just in helping them think about their own legacies, but in collaborating with them and reimagining new models for this legacy work, because they're often already doing it.
Well, I think the work is incredible and necessary. And thank you so much for spending some time with us today, Chelsea.
Thank you so much, Scott.
Be sure to check out our latest podcast and subscribe to Giving Back is Dead.